I haven't done that for a very, very long time. I used to play the organ at school and also a couple of times at Canterbury Cathedral. But here today I'm in Lewes at the All Saints, what used to be a church, which was built in 1561 and went out of its parochial business in 1975 when a few years later it was turned into a centre for the community, and it's a goodie too. A little while ago in the summer we did a film here called The Book of Mauritius, which had me and Gillian in it. She played a nun, I played a monk, and of course our Betty was in it playing Barry in this very jacket. So I thought it'd be nice to resurrect it, to bring him back. Whilst we were outside waiting for setups and all that to be done, we bumped into one of the volunteers here who looks after a lot of it, and with all the other lovely people that work here on behalf of the community, and that's one of the local councillors who likes to be known as Catlin. So we've invited him here today, and we're going to be a bit of history of theatre, the church, local community and all that. And we might even have a Merlot, but I know they want their coffee and I bought them some chocky biscuits today. So here we are with Catlin.
Those were the days, the palmy days of histrionic art, when at a moment's notice I'd go on in any part. That time, alas, has gone, and the light that erstwhile shone is the light of a fallen star.
Fantastic. And do tell, who wrote that?
The man who wrote My Old Dutch, the name of which temporarily escapes me, but I shall remember it, and if I shout out in the middle of the next bit, I won't be calling you, I will have remembered his name.
I'm like that, going into a room, say, why have I come in here? And then suddenly you realise it's to put the kettle on.
Yes, but does the kettle still fit?
Occasional.
Well, one should take luck where one finds it.
Absolutely. When we were walking in, we were just pointing over there.
The vault that is still in use.
Right. Do tell.
Well, it's easier to look at it, but tell I will, certainly. Through the dust and grime, you will see there are still remains which are tended by the family. Mm-hmm. One of the bodies in there is a priest who was here. The other is the body of the American man who owned Lewes House and brought the Rodin statue, The Kiss, to Lewes. Right. And he is in there too, because those grounds, while they now run under a new housing estate, were under the grounds of Lewes House.
And that's
in the High Street.
And that was where Lewes House used to be?
Well, Lewes House is still there at the front. Those houses are built on what were the grounds of right. Lewes House.
Ah.
Lewes is changing, and it's just as well we don't change to go with it, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I think, anyway.
And keeping a bit of history alive too, which is most important.
Yes, it's important. Less important these days because people are no longer interested in learning from the past. They are merely interested in repeating it.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
And we'll go from there. Just over there, behind the camera, is the Baxter Memorial. Baxter was a Lewes printer up in the High Street, and the printing works occupied an area which is now another housing estate. He is the man who, in the early 19th century, patented printing in colour. And if you see any of his works, which you will get a chance to on Sunday when the town hall is open for Heritage Open Day, the matching of the colours, the registration of the colours is actually 10 times better than anything we see today. But he was a Lewes printer, and Baxter's moved about 10 years ago to Crawley. The works were redeveloped, at that time, 600 people worked at Baxter's and would all go out at lunchtime to spend their money on the shops and in the cafes in Lewes. We do not have that size of workforce anymore, and although the National Park states that it wishes to preserve the Lewes community, unless it uses sites zoned for industrial use for more modern, clean, efficient industry, we will not have a workforce at all. It's interesting to recall a report I saw on the 2011 census, which said that 68.25% of the Lewes population is in poverty. And for all the grandness of the houses and the attitude of some of the people, behind this rich, fancy facade, there are 4 food banks and 2 estates with up to 30% child deprivation. And I really think it is time our more strategic authorities, such as the County Council, the National Park and the District Council, did something to fill the hopes and aspirations of that 68.25% in poverty.
And of course, you are a councillor here in Lewes.
Well, that may not be for too much longer. The local elections are May next year. I'm an independent at the moment. 2 other independents have said that they will not be standing again, which leaves me with rather a mammoth task of canvassing all one ward by myself. I may be obliged to join a party.
Oh. Is that between you and the ballot box?
No, if I do decide, it will be in time for it to make the elections. But I really don't know. I really don't know.
You want to continue your work?
I think perhaps I have about 4 years in me still. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
And you come and volunteer here?
Well, I did when we were actually open. Don't forget COVID knocked all this sort of thing for 6, and we are gradually reopening again. There is a very good concert by the musicians of All Saints later in September, an all-string concert with Purcell and Handel and all the rest of it. It's quite my cup of tea, so I shall come and see that. But I serve in 1 or 2 other things, like the Lewes Association of Local Councils, the South East Association of Local Councils. I'm chair of both of those at the moment. So perhaps I'll look to just concentrating on Lewes in the future.
Right, right. And so you're not going to retire yet?
I don't think I can. The time may well come when I just want to sit and say, well, of course we did it differently in my day, but at the time, and now, the present, I'm too busy thinking of how different I can be for the future. Because you can't keep looking back. We have to develop, and as a town council, we in fact have very few powers more than a parish council. We must concentrate on benefiting the population of Lewes Town. Not the whole bloody world. Lewes Town, that is who elects us. Let us look after them and not make such a fuss about trying to take care of the outside world as well. One knows one's limitations.
Well, and I do know, before you went into politics per se, you had quite a lot to do with theatre, hence your marvellous ability, unlike my good self, which is often the case, as you know, of retaining lines and all that. You worked in the theatre.
Yes, but I was always on the management side. The only time I acted was when I was assistant manager at the Grand Theatre Swansea. And sometimes we had more in the play than we had in the company. So as well as saying, good evening, how nice to see you. Yes, we've got your usual seat for you this week. Once the curtain was up, I was either the clerk of the court or a Chinese servant. And then I came out at the end to say good night to everyone. That was the only time I really appeared. Oh, and at Palmer's Green as well.
Yeah.
The Intimate, which was founded 1936 by John Clements, and was still, until the day it closed, doing weekly repertory with, let's say, no more than 5 rehearsals. Monday was the Tech and Dress and the first night. Tuesday we did Act 1 of next week's play. Wednesday we did Act 2 of next week's play. No rehearsal Thursday because there was a matinee, all seats 2 and 6. Friday we did Act 3. There were always 3 acts because we needed the bar money to keep us afloat, so we always put 2 intervals in. No rehearsal Saturday because again there were 2 houses.
Yeah.
So Monday, the Tech and Dress of the play we'd just done, you had really to be dead letter perfect all the time. Not easy.
And of course, a lot of people these days in my profession as an actor would hanker for the days of that huge amount of work you had to put in on stage.
Yes, well, I did run for a time out of my own pocket the Lyceum Theatre crew. And we always, when we started a new repertory season, we always had a flood of entrants because I was allowed by equity to give 2 new memberships. But in that first season, the new entrants were not allowed to act. They could only be ASMs, assistant stage managers, for those who don't know. Then before that, I'd managed Wyndham's in the West End for Donald Albury and did the royal visits when they came. I would have to hurtle out perhaps to the Criterion or the Piccadilly if one of them was expected there, and leave someone else at the Wyndham's. Yeah, those were, but they were different times, and this is what we mustn't lose sight of. When I was appointed house manager at Wyndham's, we still had Godspell. The top price was £2.50 for the best seat. That was in about 1975. God, it's 50 years ago, isn't it? The next play in was Celia Johnson in The Dame of Sark. That went up to £4. Then we had a transfer from the Royal Court, Teeth and Smiles. That went up to £4.50, and so on. So the gallery, which had been 25 pence for Godspell, was getting to be expensive, and I was working for a short while at the Fortune with that 2-hander, Woman in Black. And the price when I went by the Fortune the other day for a 2-hander was in excess of £40. We are losing sight of the fact that when I look back on my childhood, theatre was there to entertain. And when I was about 5, I had pneumonia, and my parents said, when you get better, we'll get a television. I didn't know what a television was. But anyway, we got better, I got better, and they went out and they got quite a large screen for the day, 12 inches, and it was made by Bush. Of course, my mother, innocent as ever, ran up and down the street inviting people in to see the coronation, telling everyone she had a 12-inch Bush. The house was more full than I've ever seen it.
I think Kenny Williams' mum got a 7-inch console, as they were called, which was like a bit of furniture.
Yes, well, ours was a table model.
Yes, so it was, she said, I think it was Kenny or somebody said to her, you know, we've got a 7-inch console, and she said, well, that would console anyone, wouldn't it?
Yes. But the thing is, in those days, on a Saturday night, peak time viewing was animal, vegetable and mineral with Sir Mortimer Wheeler. And so, as a family, we used either to go to the Wood Green Empire or the Finsbury Park Empire, either to see Variety or the number 2 or number 3 tours that were being put out at the time. Some years after the Empire closed and before it was altered to become a Sainsbury's, I was able to get the keys and look round. And although I very much enjoyed those visits when I went as 5, 6, 7 years old, I discovered that the seats we had in the gallery were no more than Rexine padded benches. I had no recollection of that when I went as a member of the audience.
Really?
The Wood Green Empire's claim to fame is, of course, an American known as the Chinese illusionist Chung Ling Soo, with a great bullet-catching act. A gun was fired. The audience thought he caught the bullet between his teeth. It wasn't, in fact, the gun was a blank and the bullet had been concealed in his mouth. But this night, the gun went wrong, a bullet did come out, and he was killed on the stage.
Now, I have actually heard that, and people often think these things are apocryphal, aren't they?
Oh, no.
Yeah, but, you're getting this from, somebody who knows, because a lot of things that are believed to be apocryphal on theatre stories all the way back, are invariably the truth. Occasionally these days, as we well know, celebrities and all that, they rather embellish a story to make it a little bit more exciting.
Yes, and perhaps tell it as something they'd experienced instead of something they had heard of.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Interesting times, and we shan't see them again, but I think perhaps theatre started to change when the Arts Council came along, because Palmer's Green and Swansea in those days, and of course the variety theatres, existed without any aid at all. They were commercial enterprises. And the moment you say arts, an awful lot of people stop going.
Normally it's I always say it's art with a capital F.
And you're not wrong. Remember when Lillian Bayliss was running the Old Vic, the people from around the New Cut, Waterloo, the ordinary people went to see her productions of Shakespeare. They may not have known it was Shakespeare, it was theatre for them, and they enjoyed every minute of it.
And far better than 405-line television.
Yes. Yes,
which
indeed.
in its day was a really ropey affair anyway. You could hardly say. I do remember. I was not alive at the time when the Queen was had the coronation, but I do remember people saying, "Well, we're all stuck in this little room watching this little thing in the corner." And you could hardly see anything at all. It was so...
Well, it was raining at the time.
It was piddling down on that day, wasn't it?
Well, and that, of course, is why we do remember the national anthem with "Long May It Rain Over Us."
Now, what I want to know, my dear friend, is... No, Chum, dear Chum. Just to ensure that you're aware, this is about you, not about me.
Oh, all right.
So what I want to know...
You disappoint me, but never mind.
Well, you won't disappoint the audience, I can tell you that. Because they're probably sick to death of hearing from me.
I could understand. Continue, prithee.
No, here we go. So what I'm going to say to you now is, how did you get into what was a very closed shop back in those days?
I wish I knew. I started writing for the Wood Green, Palmer's Green and Southgate Weekly Herald. Theatre reviews for productions at the theatre I was later to work in. They had a guy who did the reviews, but every play he saw he said was wonderful, and in Weekly, you know damn well, not every play was wonderful, let alone the performance. And so one bank holiday I went and sent a review in saying, I saw the show, your reviewer always says it's wonderful, this one was good, but they're not always, and they printed my review. And I was 14. Having read it, the guy who did their reviews chucked in his notice, and I had a phone call asking me if I would go to the Intimate Theatre, Palmer's Green, every Monday night to do a review. 14. And...
But free tickets?
Yeah, but, you know, sometimes they should have paid me to go and see it. Nevertheless, I carried on, and when it came to GCE exams and all the rest of it, we were asked, I think in French oral, what do you want to do when you leave school? And I just said, je voudrais être journaliste. And everyone thought I was going to be a journalist. Well, it was the only thing I knew how to say in French. And I didn't really see that, so I had to start writing. for a paper called the South London Advertiser, which was in Brixton in those days. And I got tired of that, playing Deadline Midnight. There were only 4 of us to do 8 editions a week, and it usually meant I would go out on a Tuesday morning, buy the Tuesday edition of the South London Press, and we spend Wednesday rewriting it. It then went to Ruislip to be printed on the presses of the Weekly Press, which was owned by the same guy, and it fell to my lot on a Wednesday to go there and fill in the gaps which occurred because the copy was dispatched by parcel on the railway to West Ruislip, thrown off by the guard and picked up by the newspaper. Sadly, not every parcel was thrown off, and one day there was this big gap and someone said, look, here's a photo, use it. And so we did a quick caption, which got us into serious trouble because we said, happy, vivacious 21-year-old, let's call her Flora Gusset, twisted the night away with the Mayor of Lambeth. Unfortunately, we didn't know. And Flora had disabilities, which meant she couldn't twist with anyone. And one Christmas, because the compositors were not English and made up what they saw on the dummies, we used as a dummy an edition from the previous December, and sadly that year the Christmas issue came out with the previous year's dateline, so we didn't sell any of that. I thought that was not the life for me, and I went off to work in local government, in local library service, and eventually worked for a cinema chain. But up until I was 15 and ready to leave school, I was doing an awful lot of television. The connection was Pollock's Toy Theatres, which you know from Robert Louis Stevenson, a penny plain and twopence coloured. I used to go to their museum, now in Scala Street, it was in Monmouth Street then, and help as a sort of Saturday boy. And I was seen by a woman who wanted me and 2 other lads to do an All Your Own with Hugh Weldon from White Ladies Studios in Bristol. I then did a Sunday special, and then a woman called Mary Plumley, who worked for Rediffusion at the time, picked on me to do a few Tuesday rendezvous. Toys made from matchboxes, toy theatres, all sorts of things like that. And one week, the star guests were the Beatles. This was in the early 60s, 62, 63. And so I did that. And when it came to the GCSEs, I was lucky to get 1. But as the senior master said, we were lucky to see you at all. What you were doing, you were ready to leave school before your 5th year. Your school was tedious. You were already out of it. And that's it.
That's exactly what happened to me. I went to boarding school and I left at the age of 16 with geography O-level.
Well, I remember on one of my geography papers, not for O-level, but the report from the master was, because I was not very good, I was not bad at English or German, but the report said, for geography, he does well to find his way home.
My only reason I got geography O-level was Mr. Peter Sweet, who was very much at that time, because 40 Towers was on, he was just like John Cleese. He was hilarious, and the old board rubber would fly across the room and all that. They still had corporal punishment in those days.
Oh, he never got promoted beyond that role of corporal then?
Is it corporal punishment?
Yes, it is.
Oh, you see, line a minute. No, he was, and that's because of his personality. You retained it more. That was the way I looked at it anyway.
Yeah.
And I went to work for my father, strange enough, in the print, because he was a printer. But I was acting as well at the same time, so, you know, off and on.
Yeah. I came to Lewes. I bought the shops, the town's tobacco shop and sweet shop, and just sort of ambled along. But people say they still miss the shop, which I find rather touching. It couldn't exist now. There are too many restrictions. Our most popular cigarettes were either the French ones, the Disque Bleu, Gauloise, Gitane, or Sobrani Black Russian or Sobrani Cocktail. And those, of course, are not sold in this country anymore, although you can still in Jersey get French cigarettes. They're just not allowed here.
Well, I remember the Cocktail Sobrani because I loved the colours, thinking stupidly in my youth, because I started smoking when I was about 18, that every different colour was a different flavour.
Well, it depended how much you'd had to drink between colours, I suppose.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
the ones that were always left were the yellow ones, because they looked like they've been dipped in some urine or something like that.
Oh, not custard?
No, they had more.
I think it says more about you that you thought of that and not custard.
They were very, I don't know what the blood albumin level was in it. I'll tell you what, they were very yellow, but of course they all tasted the same.
Yes.
And the other ones I used to smoke were Saint Moritz.
Oh yes, menthol.
Menthol.
Weren't they made? I think they were a Dunhill brand.
I think they were.
Or they came in
And
through
the only reason I
Dunhill.
wanted to have you know why? The gold thing round because being homosexual irretrievably, I thought it was camp.
No, you didn't think it was camp. You thought it was right. Being a homosexual irretrievably, you wouldn't dare to associate the word camp with yourself in those days.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Not even camp coffee.
Well, that was a hoot always, wasn't it? Camp
Made of
coffee.
chicory.
Yes. It was coffee essence, I'm told. And there was another one called Bev, B-E-V, Bev for beverage.
I did learn the other day, strangely, if you try dandelion roots, you can turn those into coffee.
Well, I used to go to Poland a lot in the days before Jaruzelski, and people would swear blind their coffee was made of acorns.
And they're not like your horse chestnuts, are they?
Not at all. And that I found rather obscure. Can you rephrase that?
No, but as you say, all those one little corner shops, all those where people would meet, they would be regular. And these days,
Well, they served a community.
yeah, and these days there's very little of that about.
And very little community.
Very little community. The wonderful thing that we did here in the summer when we met you, and as I've always said, and I've said on video blogs and all that, I'm blessed the day that through some form of serendipity, you were watering the plants.
Yes, I think I was tending the Baxter Memorial at the time, which I've just replanted,
Yeah.
because it's not been a good season for that sort of thing.
Very dry. And we were filming the Book of Mauritius
At the front of the churchyard.
in a similar sort of place like this, surrounded by yew trees, and wonderful. And then you walk past, and there's Betty and I sitting on a tree, and you with your watering can, and we just started chatting.
Yeah.
And it was a strange circumstance in the history, because when we finished, because we did some inside the church, when we finished, we got into the car, and Stephen, our lovely director, was taking us back to
Civilization?
Brighton, well, still Brighton. I just, what a fascinating man. And he piped up, I think there's a Marc and Chums there. Didn't you, dear?
I did, yes.
Yeah, and that's why we're here. We've had to postpone a big
So you're to blame.
Exactly.
Tusk.
but we were going to do this earlier, weren't we? But the centre's had some
The centre had some new fire alarms fitted, and so we usually do maintenance there in August, and it just wasn't possible. But there we are. But it's odd, I'm reminded too, when I was talking earlier about the Finsbury Park and the Wood Green Empires. At Finsbury Park Empire, for one birthday treat, I was taken to see Peter Pan. And you know who was playing Peter? Barbara Kelly.
Barbara Kelly. who was married to
Bernard Braden.
Bernard Braden, who had his own show.
Yeah.
And Barbara Kelly, they often appear together on television, didn't they?
Oh yes, but I sort of remembered that Peter Pan because for a friend of mine, David McGillivray, who does a good bit of broadcasting, we did a programme for Radio London on the lost theatres, or old theatres of London, and we met doing one at the Criterion, and I suggested to David that it would be a bit of a hoot to do a made-up theatre for Friday, April the 1st, and it was the Royal Hippodrome, East Finchley.
Mm-hmm.
We actually recorded it at the Albury Theatre, and Charles Payne was the alleged owner, proprietor and actor, and it was quite astonishing that that programme, the Royal Hippodrome, Finchley North End, was repeated on a pick of the week. I was absolutely astonished. David said at one point, "So tell me, Mr. Payne, what is your most famous production here?" And I said, I think undoubtedly it was before the war, when we had Florrie Ford as Peter Pan, which to anyone who's seen film of Florrie Ford and then thinks of Peter Pan, it was nigh impossible. Do you have any stars in? Now, I prefer to say at this theatre we have a company of players. Oh, what's on next week? Well, we were to do Noel Coward's, whatever it was, Noel Coward's.
Blithe Spirit or something.
Blithe Spirit. Unfortunately, our juvenile has just been arrested for importuning, and so we'll be doing something else.
Importuning for an immoral purpose.
Well, I don't know that it was that. I mean, this was the BBC. We couldn't possibly have said that. But the play Charles Payne was talking about was actually Hay Fever.
Fever.
Yeah, Hay Fever. Oh, and
I've never played any. I love Blithe Spirit though. I think it's a fabulous.
Margaret Rutherford.
Oh, adored her. And I think, although a lot of people these days have had so many different Miss Marples over the years, I know that the first one she did was based on the 450 from Paddington, which was called Murder, she said. And then they did Murder Most Foul, Murder at the Gallop, and Murder Ahoy. But two of those were Poirot stories.
Yes.
And Murder Ahoy wasn't Agatha Christie at all.
The first Agatha Christie I ever saw was donkeys years ago at the Palace Pier Theatre, Brighton, when the old actress who played Nancy or Grandma Grove in the Grove family was playing.
Oh, done it.
Just,
I thought I turned that off.
well, no, it just shows people that you are actually still wanted.
Are live. Sorry.
No, you're not.
Yes, I am.
You're just doing it to get attention. We know now you're here. Can you switch it off? You've done that bit.
It's not switched. I've done that. Oh, wait, it's switched. I've switched it off.
Well, there you are. Anyway, it was Murder at the Vicarage at the Palace Pier
Murder
Theatre,
at the
Brighton.
Vicarage. Of course, that theatre was destroyed, taken apart.
It was supposed to be put into storage because it was listed and it ain't in storage anymore.
And we all know who did that.
Do we? Do tell.
The Noble brothers, who owned...
Well, actually, the Palace Pier at the time, Brighton Marine Palace and Pier Company, was one of Moss's holdings.
Really?
Yep, and they sold it, and then perhaps it went. But certainly...
Yeah, but they changed the... Oh.
I thought you turned it off.
I have to.
Well, you just cannot resist being the centre of attention, can you?
Excuse me a moment.
And stop looking so aloof.
Take two on the clock, love. Take three. Will you bloody well turn off?
Well, it's all very well having all this technology, but no good if you can't operate it.
Well, it's no, only because it's right by my mic.
Well, does that switch it on?
But of course, when the Noble brothers took it, they got rid of the name Palace and changed it to Brighton Pier, which
Yes.
everyone in Brighton was absolutely up in arms with. And of course, it's now been resold. They've left ages ago.
Oh, yeah.
And it's now called the Brighton Palace Pier, so it's back.
But no, I just thought it's called Brighton Pier.
It's
And they're
now
still calling it the Palace Pier?
It's now on the front of it. It's now Brighton Palace Pier because they just had it called Brighton Pier.
Yeah. Well, after the West Pier went, it was the only pier, wasn't
Yeah.
it?
Absolutely. And of course, the Chain Pier went an awful lot more years before that. In the
Yes, I
story.
remember you telling me about witnessing it going, did you? Perhaps not. Perhaps it was the tale you
You're
heard
gonna
at your
say that I was around
grandfather's
when the
knee.
Daddy Longlegs was going along on the seafront.
You always told me you were.
Imagine having an electrical train service
In the middle of the sea.
in the sea, going all the way. It went all the way to
Went further than it does now. It went to Rottingdean.
Rottingdean.
Yeah.
And when the tide goes out, you can actually still see the piles where.
Oh, you suffer too.
I like this man's sense of humour.
I haven't got one.
Yes, you have. Well, you make me laugh anyway. But
Well, it doesn't take much. I stand in front of
you
a
might
mirror
have
and
been around there because you know you're still a sprightly lad, aren't you?
it is odd. I don't know how, when I went into, let's say, the business, I knew all about how it should run, about film booking, because I was for a time running the Rex East Finchley, or the Rec, as we used to call it in those days.
It wasn't called the flea pit. Then.
No. Well, no, people had great respect for the Rex, and it was struggling to find product. And then I thought, well, let's show some films that don't get a release. And we were playing things like The Battle for Algiers, supported with an old Marx Brothers comedy. We then went into showing double bills of quite good films, The Odd Couple with No Way to Treat a Lady. And at 5 shillings and 6 shillings a seat, this 528-seater was taking 900 and even 1,300 pounds a week.
Mm-hmm.
So multiply 928, which we did with The Odd Couple and No Way to Treat a Lady, by 4. 3,600 people during 7 days went into this 528-seater cinema in East Finchley. It is still there, and I am credited with the fact that it's still open, although it is now called the Phoenix.
The Phoenix. As it did disappear, it has risen from.
Well, it just more. It changed. It was originally the East Finchley Picture Coliseum.
Ah.
Then it was modernised in the 30s and called the Rex, and then it was altered yet again, still retaining the outside walls, as the Phoenix. Yeah. So I didn't shut everything.
Well, so you kept things open.
Well, it was quite interesting. There's an old story about Cissy Williams, who was the Moss Empire's booking controller. And someone is supposed to have said to her one day, "So tell me, what's new for the circuit?" "Oh," she said, "something really good next week at Swansea." "Oh," she said, "yes, we're closing it. And if it's a success, we're going to bring it in throughout the whole circuit." And the Swansea Empire was the first to go.
And so many more have gone since.
Indeed, those were, yes, there were days of more poverty, more difficulty, but how much easier then for the purveyors of pictures and plays to sell dreams. And a friend of mine from those years, a guy called Alf Sparrow, whose grandfather had built and ran several theatres in the London suburbs, they had a cinema in Loughton called the Kinema, and it said, "For the price of a few pennies, you may enter our magic portals and forget the goings-on of the outside world." And we really need, perhaps, something to work to that effect now.
I even played Father Christmas in Loughton.
That town has much to be sorry for.
Now, unbeknownst, a lot of you out there do know that normally, by this time, I would have been halfway through this bottle. But because we've been outside in the delicious fresh air doing this wonderful show with Catlin, who's going to be doing a bit of a reading for us in a moment, I have got I Love Merlot. And what was the joke you just came up with?
Well, I thought he was the magician at King Arthur's court.
With his cousin Shiraz?
Well, they were on the halls, weren't they? I remember those. I think it was a Jewish act, Merlot and Shiraz. It used to go down very well at the Metropolitan Edgware Road. But that also then reminds me of an incident of my youth when there was a cinema at Palmer's Green called the Queen's Hall. Not that it was. And Moss Harris himself, the owner, who was a refugee from Austria, he was quite a character. We had the cinema down the road at Enfield, and a firm called Smith Harkness turned up at once one day with a new screen, and Moss said, "How much?" Because they wanted cash before they put it in. So-and-so said, "I'm not paying that. Go and see old Stephen down at Florida Enfield. They want a sheet down there." So we took the screen off them that was meant for the Queen's Hall, Palmer's Green. The tale, however, is of this. I was there, the pay box, when he was inside selling the tickets. And this timorous, genteel lady, as Palmer's Green was in those days, the rest of us referred to it as kippers and curtains. But Palmer's Green was quite the place. And this woman went in and said, "Oh, please, can you tell me, Mr. Harris, if you'll be showing 7 Brides for 7 Brothers?" Well, Mossy used to fall out with all the film renters over the terms. And his answer was, "Well, then you'll have to go and fucking see it at the Empire, lady, because I'm not paying Metro's terms." And we don't know if she did, because she never went back to see Mr. Harris at the Queen's Hall, Palmer's Green.
She might have if they'd put on 7 Brides for 7 Brothers.
Yes, but he wasn't paying the terms Metro wanted.
I wonder how much those sort of costs went to independent cinema.
Well, generally, you had a rising scale. If not 1,500, 40%, if not so-and-so, 30%. So generally, we paid for some of the reruns, or indeed the older films we put together for a double bill, we paid 25%. 25% of the takings.
Of the takings?
Yeah. Of the takings, yes, net of, in those days, ED money. The ED levy came in when we were importing too much American stuff to pay for British films. So every cinema in those days had to show a quota of British films as its main feature, and the production of those films was subsidised by, if I can remember, an 11th of every penny over an admission price of 1 9. So you deducted from your total number the total number of admissions times 1 9, and then divided the rest by 11 and paid that to the government as ED money, which paid for more British films.
Using mental arithmetic rather than, the...
We did have adding machines.
Not like these modern...
No, and indeed,
I'll tell you something. I used to go to Saturday cinema in Whitstable at what was then the Oxford. It was originally called the Oxford Picture Hall, but then became the Oxford Picture House. It had nothing to do with Oxford. It was just because the road outside was called Oxford Street. And we went in there every week to see Flash Gordon and all that sort of stuff, the old Republic.
Serials.
And an awful lot a lot of my friends started their careers at the Children's Film Foundation, like John Mulder Brown and Fraser Hines.
Is John Mulder Brown still alive?
Yeah, he used to live in Brighton. I used to take. He had started up ACT, the Academy of Creative Training, and I used to take on a few of his more competent actors when they...
He was in that Diana Dawes film, Deep End, was it called Deep End, which we showed at the Brighton Film Theatre?
Yeah, Deep End, I remember it, and I always had the... but he started very young with Fraser in things like Go Kart Go and Diamonds on Wheels. masks and all this stuff, and it always had a really good senior cast. You know,
Yeah.
They were all, you know, your Wilfred Brambles, all you know, what your Warren Mitchells, really established actors, which was part and parcel. Like the Hammer films always had to have, when they started up as exclusive films before they became Hammer, when they took on Nigel Neal's Quatermass series, which was for the BBC, they had to have an American actor to play Quatermass. Nigel Neal hated it. Bernard Don Levy. And he was always pissed. All that. But my friend Rennie Glynn was the script supervisor on the Quatermass Experiment, the film, went on to do several other Hammer films. But of course Hammer became a huge output for British cinema for America.
Yeah.
And that's why all those people in those films, all gothic horrors, very lame now, although they used to get their titties out a lot, didn't they, towards the end. Not the boys, the girls. Your Ingrid Pitts and all that lot were always quite lesbian in the whole thing. They all became very well-known actors who went on to have huge careers.
I remember seeing the Quatermass, was it Andre Morel in the television series?
He played in Quatermass in the Pit.
And I remember...
And that still exists in its entirety as the television version.
Watching it, but on the floor from behind the armchair, and I'd peep out to see the bits that didn't look as though they might be scary and retreat back behind the armchair.
Nigel Neal also wrote, which had Peter Cushing in, 1984, the TV version. With both, they did it twice, both live, but only the second one exists as a recording. But, talking of Peter Cushing, the Oxford Picture House is now a Wetherspoons in Whitstable called the Peter Cushing.
How good. He was such a kind man and a nice man. I met him, he gave a programme at the Brighton Film Theatre one Sunday many years ago, and he was the perfect gentleman.
Oh, and was very good with props, always little...
He always wore a white glove when smoking, so that his hands were not stained.
But no, he actually lived next door to my dad in Whitstable. And my Auntie Margaret used to occasionally on a Wednesday go and have tea with him in the Tudor tea rooms back in the day. But and always cycling, he cycled everywhere around Whitstable. But they've kept all the old arc projectors and all that, which are all now in the foyer on display with all of his Hammer films.
Well, because I remember real changes every 20 minutes, little Q dots in the top right-hand corner of the screen. Those were the days when you didn't call the guy a projectionist, he was an operator.
And of course, in television, they had those little dots come up, you know, certainly on the ITV, to let you know that the time's coming down. And I always used to sit there going, wonder what they're for.
And then there was a break.
And then it was, they're going to an advert, or it was coming to the end of it, you know, because everything at the BBC in those days was telesyned. And if they didn't, and videotaping very, very expensive, they would then transfer, which I would have thought it was even more expensive, transfer things like 1984, Quatermass, all those sort of shows, lots of in white now, onto 16mm film.
Because the reproduction on film was better. In those days, one could always tell on a television programme if it had been filmed or taped. Oh, yes. Because there was a gloss to the film which wasn't on a tape. But I think we're coming to the time to part company and say goodbye, and nothing better perhaps to use than a couple of verses from A Fallen Star. I quoted two bits completely in the wrong place when we were out in the churchyard earlier, and it's very sad, and it was written by Albert Chevalier, who most people, if they remember the name at all, will remember his semi-sang, semi-spoken My Old Dutch. So it's very much of that period. And this was a man, a fallen star, an actor, gone, forgotten. And it starts, 30 years ago, I was a favourite at the Vic, a finished actor, not a cuff and collar shooting stick. I roused the house to laughter, or called forth the silent tear, and made enthusiastic gods vociferously cheer. Those were the days, the palmy days of histrionic art. Without a moment's notice, I'd go on for any part. I do not wish to gas, I merely state in self-defense. The denizens of Newcut thought my Hamlet was immense. 30 years ago, I can hear them shout, "Bravo!" when after fighting armies, I could never show a scar. That time, alas, is gone, and the light that erstwhile shone was the light of a falling star. From patrons of the circle too, I had my meed of praise. The ladies all admired me in those happy halcyon days. My charm of manner, easy grace, and courtly old-world air, heroic bursts of eloquence, or villain's dark despair. I thrilled my audience, thrilled them as they never had been thrilled, and filled the theatre nightly as it never had been filled. Right through the gamut of emotions I could range, from classic Julius Caesar to the idiot of the Grange. 30 years ago, I was someone in the show, and now I pass unrecognized in crowded street or bar. The firmament of fame holds no record of my name, the name of a fallen star. Sad, isn't it?
And beautifully delivered, if I may say so.
You're very kind.
You have the gravitas, is the word, I think. And to think that you say you've never been an actor, well, you're going to appear in one of our films, if I bloody have to kick you down into the... But no, thank you so much for that. It's a bit of history, a bit of something, which obviously a lot of people have never heard.
And don't really want to know either, if we're honest.
Well, yeah, but that's the point of this sort of programme, is to bring those things out, that you can have poems, narration, whatever. And so people said, oh, I would like to have heard more of that. Or
well, let me know if they want, because there's a third verse. And we won't do that today.
Right. Well, I think we're coming to the end of our...
Mark, thank you very much for what I thought was going to be a very entertaining afternoon, with you entertaining me. Sadly, the boot was on the other foot, and I hope I've done what you wanted. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. It has been a pleasure, and I'm so glad after this time that we actually got round to doing it, because of, problems with coming here. But thank you again to Catlin. He has been a marvellous guest today. And thank you to All Saints Centre, which is beautiful. And I love the blue, because that's TARDIS blue. Wonderful.
Can I leave you with this thought?
He's going to leave us with a thought.
It's not really that time heals all wounds, but when you think of the last Prime Minister, time wounds all heals. Goodbye, everyone. Goodbye.